The roots of our relationship to animals go back at least 23 centuries to the time of Aristotle, whose idea of the scala naturae, the natural scale, placed humans above all the other animals, although below God and the angels. In the 17th century, the French philosopher René Descartes really further diminished animal status by arguing that they were thoughtless, mindless brutes, mere automatons without the capacity to feel or think, and therefore of no moral consequence. To this day, these ideas are influential because almost universally in human cultures on Earth today, we relegate animals as the property of humans, the legal property of humans. There are very few exceptions to that. And we kill approximately 60 billion land animals and an unknown number of marine vertebrates, perhaps 1 to 2 trillion by some estimates. And we kill most of them to eat them. However, we also kill hundreds of millions for fashion, to satisfy our scientific curiosity, and for sport and recreation, and some other reasons that we kill them. Not necessarily justifiable reasons. I'm certainly not justifying them. And we might sum up these types of uses, these kinds of exploitation, as fitting a might makes right way of thinking. And might makes right has a pretty rich history in human behavior. Might makes right was used to justify colonialism, the African slave trade, the subjugation of women's rights, and the denial of civil rights. Fortunately, we've done a great deal to relegate these past social ills to the history books. And there's a number of possible reasons for that, relatively recent reasons that have emerged in human culture. And the book by Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, articulates a few of these ideas that I want to just briefly sum up for you. There's no debate that violence has declined, and this was mentioned last night. The debate is more about why has it declined. Here are some possible reasons that Pinker outlines in his book. The rise of statehoods, where we actually elect leaders instead of somebody by dint of what kind of blood they have, what kind of royal heritage they may have, becomes the leader or the de facto leader. The empowerment of women is another force for the good. Women have been shown in study after study to generally be more compassionate than males. It's not that males can't be compassionate, of course they can. But on average, women who have evolved as nurturers, raising the children, tend to be more compassionate. So the rise of feminism, the empowerment of women, is a very powerful, good change happening in society today. International commerce, the fact that other nations can be seen as beneficial, as, say, trading partners, as opposed to a supply of human slaves that we might use. This is another positive change that we've seen in recent centuries. Oops. The rise of literacy. Oh, sorry, I'm pushing the wrong button. Incredibly, just a century ago, the number of humans, the percentage of humans on Earth who were literate, who could read and write, was in the 20s, 20th percentile, 25% or so. And now it's in the 70s. So it's sort of tripled in the last century. An incredible, huge change that perhaps is partly due to the fact that we are, sorry, I keep pushing the wrong button, a more cosmopolitan nation now. There's much more exchange of information. Education is rising. People are more informed than they used to be. And now we have the internet, the information superhighway. And that, in turn, probably has a lot to do with the rise of reason. People think and assess more. We travel more. We are exposed to more ideas. So these are all what Steven Pinker, the author of that book, calls civilizing processes. And I think these have played a major role in relegating those social ills that I mentioned before to, as I say, the history books. We're not done. There's plenty far to go with those issues. There's still a lot of inequalities and imbalances and poverty, as Jane Goodall mentioned last night, in the world. But I think it's fair to say that we can see moral, social progress happening in the world. And I want to, of course, say, with reference to this conference, at the same time, we're seeing an unprecedented interest in the status of animals, concern for the moral place of animals. And this is attributable to a number of things. The rise of ideas from philosophers such as Peter Singer, whose 1976 book or 75 book, Animal Liberation, is widely regarded as sort of the manifesto of the modern animal rights movement. Tom Reagan, The Case for Animal Rights, a very influential book. He's a deontologist, and Singer's a utilitarian, but really that doesn't matter so much as the fact that these people are influential, they're widely read, and their ideas are spreading around the world. Similarly, we can thank some scientists and biologists for bringing about changes in how we think about animals. You may recognize this fellow as Charles Darwin, who's, of course, he made a number of contributions. He wrote about 18 books, but certainly his most important and well-known celebrated contribution is the notion that we have evolution by natural selection, which was really, finally, it was an idea that made us realize that we truly are connected to other animals in flesh and blood, and beyond that to plants as well. A lesser-known figure, nonetheless an important one, certainly to me is one who studied bats, Donald Griffin, an American biologist who, as a graduate student in the late 1930s, discovered echolocation in bats. I like to point out that the bats had discovered that quite a bit earlier than that. But he really started to make even more significant contributions to our understanding and relationship to animals in the 1970s, when he began to ask questions about what are animals thinking and how are they feeling? And a series of books he wrote, I think, have played a major role in concert with the ideas of Peter Singer and philosophers like him and Tom Reagan, to bring to the surface ideas of ways of looking at animals that we weren't looking at before. Much of the 20th century, there was a taboo on asking questions about how animals think and feel. And I think we can credit Donald Griffin, and before him, Charles Darwin, to some degree with bringing about that change. And then, of course, there are biologists that really are so famous they don't need any introduction. In case you don't recognize that, that is me, yes, when I had a little bit more hair. This is me, not this, but that's probably the most exciting snake I ever found, a hognose snake in Texas. And it's a very exciting time to be an ethologist, somebody who studies animal behavior. It's a word that Europeans seem to know better than Americans do, North Americans. Not a very well-known word there, perhaps because the main ethologists who won the Nobel Prize in the early 1970s were all Europeans. But anyway, it's a great time to be an ethologist because scientists are now asking really exciting, interesting questions about what is going on in here and in here with animals. And there's a lot. Scientists, through clever, innovative study designs, for instance, have shown that rats have metacognition. That is to say, they know what they know, and they know what they don't know, and they know when they're not sure. And I describe the experiments in my book, Second Nature, and I don't really have time to describe it in detail. If you want to know how they did that, come and ask me afterwards. I'd be happy to explain the clever study design that showed metacognition in rats. I can sum up an experiment published about 10 years ago in just 4 words, the fourth one of which, when I read it, really surprised me. Caged birds become pessimistic. And when I thought pessimism, and for that matter, optimism, which was also described in a subsequent study in these birds, and has also been studied in other animals, pigs, rats, honeybees, which is intriguing. You think about pessimism and optimism, these are not fleeting feelings. They are emotions, but they're not just how I feel at this moment. Pessimism is a general state of being. You're feeling kind of down. It's almost like on the way to depression, which, by the way, I don't approve of these experiments, but scientists actually use mice as a model of depression. You know, they put them in situations that make the mice very kind of apparently miserable. They appear to be miserable. How do we know that? We don't really know that, but we can certainly surmise that. And when we look at the capabilities that animals have, it's very reasonable to make these conclusions. Well, how do you demonstrate pessimism in a starling? sorry, you're going to have to ask me later. It just takes too long to describe. It's a pretty complex experiment, but it's very clever. And if I have time later, ask me, and I'll be happy to describe it. But I have limited time, and there's a lot I want to get through. I haven't even got to pleasure yet, and I am going to get to that shortly. But indulge me with a few more exciting things about what ethologists are discovering now about animals. Here's a great thing that's happening is the technological advances allow us to witness aspects of animals' lives that we couldn't witness before. Donald Griffin discovering echolocation in bats was really a technological advance. We had leak detectors for pipes, and they would detect high-frequency sounds. Before that, we didn't have that. So it was a mystery how bats flew around in the dark for centuries. People had wondered why they could do that, and there were theories, but we didn't have the technology to reveal that. Camera traps, where we can put cameras out that are motion sensitive, and they essentially wait until something comes by or somebody comes by, and then they trigger and take a photograph. Here's an example of what they discover. Hitchhiking by genets, small cats, African cats. These cats hop on the back of a large mammal and get a free ride. Okay, they don't get to decide where they're going, but there are a number of advantages to that. You get safe height, you get probably a good view, and they have superb night vision. So these big buffaloes and rhinos and other animals probably scare little mammals off. Then they can see the mammal running away, jump down, and catch the mammal. So it probably has a number of benefits. These guys are so big they don't seem to mind. Maybe they kind of like it. And I will get to the pleasure of touch a little bit later, which of course resonates with Tony Frohoff's beautiful presentation that we just saw. What about tool use by reptiles? I know a biologist, he's actually a colleague of mine. His name is escaping me, but I'll say it later if I think of it. Sorry about that. Anyway, he spent 6 years traveling around the globe studying all 28, 27, 26, depending on who you ask, species of crocodilians. And he documented things like climbing trees, cooperative hunting, sexual orgies, and he also documented tool use in 2 different species. I believe one is Old and one is New World, so it probably evolved independently. This particular type of tool use involves these animals floating sticks on their heads and swimming to where herons nest, and then submerging and letting the sticks float on the water above them. Herons build their nests out of sticks, and sticks are in prime demand at nesting season. You probably have a morbid enough imagination to finish the story. But it's a very sophisticated kind of tool use because it involves both location and time specificity. Herons do not nest everywhere, and they do not nest year-round. They only nest in certain places at certain times. And the crocodiles know that. And that's the only time that they float these sticks to these rookeries and do this behavior. There's a lot more going on up there in a crocodile's mind than we used to think. What about tool use in fishes? My book was mentioned, and here's a chance to plug my book. I'll probably be plugging it again in my talk. If you haven't seen this bookmark, it's a little promotional tool. They're downstairs with the books. Please do take one. I do not want to take them home with me. And the book is actually out. They just arrived at my home yesterday, but they are not ready in the stores, but in about 3 weeks they will be. So I'm hoping they'll be available in Brussels. I can't be sure of that, but they're certainly available online. But I describe tool use in fishes in that book. This is an example. This is a tuskfish. Actually, this one I think is a wrasse, but tuskfishes and wrasses are among the known tool-using fishes. Probably many other species do similar behaviors, but because they're below the surface, literally and metaphorically, we often miss what they can do. But now, again, with technological advances, we have better cameras. We can see, literally, what's going on below the surface. And this tuskfish has blown water on the sand, which is arguably a kind of tool use in itself, and then has uncovered this unfortunate mollusk, picks it up, carries it to a specific rock, and then with a series of well-coordinated head flicks and releases, not easy. Try and break a walnut on a rock underwater sometime, not easy. They are able to succeed in smashing open the mollusk and getting the soft tissue inside. So this is tool use in a fish. I visited the Clever Dog Lab in Vienna a couple of years ago and got to see some of the cool experiments they're doing with dogs. Dogs, the domestic dogs, are the new darlings of animal research. I don't know why it took ethologists so long to think of studying dogs, because they've been living with us and manipulating us for 15,000 years, and we can really read their emotions and they can read ours quite well. So for instance, this dog here has been trained to put his or her, by the way, these are people's pets or companion animals. They're happy dogs. They can quit whenever they like. They're not there for, they're not research dogs. They come in voluntarily, well, sort of voluntarily, and they can stop putting their head in that headrest anytime without any punishment. It's just reward is what they use. Here's a dog getting a treat for putting his or her nose in the headrest or chin in the headrest for a minute or whatever. So by doing that, you have the animal engaged, and then you can present them with different stimuli, pictures of happy dogs and sad and angry dogs and happy humans and angry humans and boring things like shoes. Well, I guess if you're a dog, maybe shoes are exciting. And lo and behold, dogs respond differently to this. You can see how their eyes move. They can have a camera on the eyes of the dog. And they can find, for instance, that dogs, when they see a human face, they glance left. They glance left first. Why is that? Well, because of our bilateral brain conveys more emotional information on that side of the face. Do they do that with other dogs? No, they do not. Why is that? Well, because dogs' bilateral brains apparently do not convey bilateral emotional information. They're emotional, and there's certainly differences here, and you can measure differences in how the dogs react, but their eyes won't glance that way. Neither do ours when we look at a dog, but when we look at other humans, we don't know we're doing it. It's subconscious, but we glance left. Usually, we glance left first. And that way, we're getting a little bit of more information about what's the emotional status. And you can see how through evolutionary time living with humans, it would pay off to know if they're a little ticked off, they don't want to be bothered right now, or maybe they're in a really good mood and they might give me a treat. So it's useful information for a dog to have, and a human for that matter. Another thing that they can find with these studies is they can put cameras above the dog, and they've discovered that, curiously, dogs wag their tail more to the left. It's more that way when they're a little uncomfortable, apprehensive, stressed, concerned, afraid, and more to the right if they're relaxed and happy. And I suspect that dogs are reading this themselves on each other and picking that up. They're picking up smells, they're picking up body signals like that and body language. This is a pretty confident dog with the tail up. Both of them probably know each other. They look pretty relaxed. But that tail wag may be conveying information. And you think how we chop the tails off of a lot of purebred dogs. We're removing one of the most important communication tools on the animal's body. We really shouldn't be doing that. Hopefully, studies like this will inform future policies about which bits of dogs we decide to leave on, hopefully all of them, except perhaps, well, a certain part that I won't go into details. At Emory University in Georgia, scientists have been training dogs, again through positive reinforcement, to stay still in fMRI machines so we can actually read their brain activity. And by doing that, they found, for instance, that while a dog seems to be more excited emotionally about seeing a familiar dog compared to an unfamiliar dog, their favorite is seeing their familiar human. Perhaps it's because it's the one who feeds them, but maybe it's for other reasons. So, we say that a dog is a man's best friend. It may cut both ways. As a man or a woman is a dog's best friend as well. Another way of just conveying the exciting times that we're in for ethology and for studying and thinking about and appreciating animals is the scholarly assessment of animals. And we have a new journal that I wanted to plug called Animal Sentience. We just launched it in December. It's the first ever journal on animal feeling. And because it feels like something to think, we include studies also of how animals think. And it's a multidisciplinary, fully online, open access free journal. You don't have to pay subscription fees. Authors don't have to pay fees. So the idea is open access, plurality, availability of information. And we've already had some quite colorful interactions on the journal because we encourage people to make comments on what's been published. So it's a very interactive environment. All right. Let me now segue into an area of animal study that I particularly have a fondness for. It's a very buoyant area. I mentioned earlier some of the negative aspects of our relationship with animals. But with the study of animals, we're now really starting to appreciate the positive sides of their lives. It's something that I think has been a long time coming. And when I thought first about writing a book about animal pleasure, when I was watching two crows 15 years ago, and I watched them preen each other, and one crow asked for the massage on the neck, and the other crow gave the massage, and I saw that, I thought, you know, if I was to pick one word that would sum up this interaction, it would be pleasure. And I thought, I've spent 10 years in 3 universities studying biology, getting 3 degrees, and I don't remember a single time when my professor of any sort put animal behavior in the context of pleasure. It's not that they would deny it, it just wasn't part of the conversation. So here's just covers of a couple of books I've written about this to hopefully help to bring this issue to light. And it's just another measure of the exciting time. Current biology, you know, here's an issue that was dedicated to, where is it? The biology of fun. This was 2015, January 2015. I'm not taking credit for this, although perhaps my books had a role, but it's a measure of science opening up and being willing to talk about things that 20 years before that, I'm sure other scientists here would attest, scientists were not ready to talk about the biology of fun, I can tell you. So just sort of give an overall view about the role, the place of pleasure in evolution, in animal lives, and our lives, of course, we being biologically animals too. Whereas pain is nature's way of punishing maladaptive behaviors that cause perhaps injury or death and remove yourself from the gene pool, pleasure is nature's way of rewarding good behaviors that promote survival, such as eating food, and reproduction, for instance. And just to illustrate how science, until quite recently, has been really agnostic, has been really silent on this question, this aspect of animal pleasure. When I was researching my first book, Pleasurable Kingdom, I found a review paper on the curious human cultural phenomenon of spicing our food, putting salt and pepper or chili peppers, various spices. We have a rich array of spices. Just go to an Asian restaurant and you know what I'm talking about. Well, why do we do that? And this study that I read about was talking about some of the better explanations that the evidence seemed to support. One was that it may ward off harmful germs and microbes in our stomach. Some of those spices may actually reduce the amount of that. That was actually the leading one. But another possibility, I just wanted to say, there were some other theories, but this wasn't one of them, making our food taste good. Hands up if when you spice your food, you're thinking about warding off those parasites. Any hands? Not too many. What about to enhance the taste? Anyone interested in doing that? Oh, quite a few hands, yes, okay. I was looking at the left side of your face to see what your emotions were, by the way. Yes, indeed. I mean, and it's not to say that this isn't legit. This is maybe the evolutionary reason, the origin of the behavior, but this is the proximal experiential reason that we do it. Our sensory world is what guides us to behave adaptively. Here's one other example. When rats and hamsters were fed the same food, I forget what it was, it may have been bananas instead of walnuts. When they were said, let's just say bananas for 3 days, they eat the bananas, they like bananas, generally speaking. And then on 4th day, they're offered bananas and walnuts. Guess which food they chose on day 4? Walnuts. And the scientists who did the study said, well, maybe this is because this is an adaptive response to avoiding an overdependence on one kind of food, or perhaps it might be a way to avoid a micronutrient deficiency. So in other words, if you're just eating bananas, you're getting some good nutrients, but you might be missing something, whereas walnuts have other nutrients in them. Did the paper mention just getting sick and tired of bananas 3 days in a row? No, they didn't mention that. I actually emailed one of the authors who said, yeah, well, I think we talked about that, but it wasn't suitable for the journal. It is suitable for the journal. This is experience, so hopefully we'll have studies like that. Well, I don't know if it's nice to give rats only the same food 3 days in a row. I wouldn't do that to my pet rats when I had them. But anyway, this is the way of thinking that we're hoping we will encourage with animal sentience, because we need to be thinking more broadly about animals' sensory experience of the world. So let's continue into animal pleasure. Food is really so obviously tied with pleasure. We know that from our personal experience, and why would we think otherwise for other species? And if we think about how vitally important, how indispensable food is to survival, is it any wonder that we're very keen about it? I'm sure there's some people in here that are already feeling a little rumbly and looking forward to lunch. You know, the anticipation of that. It's enough to make you optimistic. And look at the role that the interaction that plants have had with animals related to food. Fruit, it really excites me. I'm actually thinking of writing a book about the relationship between frugivores and fruit, because it's so varied and colorful and buoyant and exciting and delicious and almost sexy. And this photo, it just really conveys the lengths to which plants go to attract animals to them. Look at the colors. We know the nice smells, the sweet tastes. And of course, a very big nutritional reward is packed in there, although often the nutrients are packed more into the rind, the outer part, than the part we eat. That raises some interesting questions that I won't go into right now. But it's all about seed dispersal. It's in terms of from the plant's perspective. It's all about moving those seeds somewhere else. As we saw in some earlier slides from Monica, some plants use the wind to move their seeds. Some have evolved seeds that stick to animals' fur or our clothing, and we pluck it off. And thank you very much. We've just done exactly what the plant wanted us to do. Maybe it's really wanted us to do. That is to move the seeds somewhere else where they're not competing with the parent plant for light, water, and nutrients. That's a big priority for a plant, because they cannot move themselves, so they need something else to move them. And fruit, of course, evolved to use that mobile organism, the animal, the frugivorous animal, to get those seeds and move them somewhere else. So it's a very nice arrangement. I generally have been referring it to a mutualism, but I'm starting to think that maybe it deserves to be called, I'm blanking on the term. Help me out, Tony, what were you suggesting it would be? Thank you. Reciprocity? That wasn't the one. I heard another term, but anyway, there's some other language that I think is more speaks to the richness of this relationship, certainly from the animal's perspective as a sentient being. This is my one poop slide. After eating the fruit, well, we may carry it somewhere and drop it physically. The seeds have moved, but if we ingest it, a lot of those seeds survive the transport through the animal system and get dropped out in a very convenient package of fertilizer. Studies of lizards, iguana lizards, find that an iguana who is in captivity and under a nice warm heat lamp is more or less willing to go into a refrigerator, which would kill them if they stayed there, too cold, to get a piece of fresh lettuce instead of that boring old reptile chow that they've had under their perch for 3 days, depending on the cost-benefit ratio. So if it's colder there, or if there's less lettuce or wilty lettuce, they're a little less likely to go. If you change that and make it more appealing, they're more likely to go. So they seem to be making assessments of the anticipated reward based on what the reward ratio is to the costs. Comfort is really important for animals. Homeostasis. As warm-blooded creatures, we need to stay warm, just a few degrees off of our set point, and we're going to die. So it's pretty important to stay comfy. We take our clothes off, we add clothes, we get out of the cold and get into a hot shower. Or if you went into that hot shower when you just come out of a sauna, you wouldn't feel comfortable because you're moving yourself further away from your set point, your homeostasis. So our body is continually rewarding us, encouraging us, punishing us for moving towards or away from our set point. Not just temperature, food, water, a lot of other ways that we can approach homeostasis, such as these ring-tailed lemurs are doing here. And of course, sometimes bricks can be a nice warm retreat from the cold, or they can be a nice cold retreat from the hot, depending on what time of day and where you are. I volunteer at a local animal sanctuary where chickens will, when the doors are open to the barn, first thing on a sunny morning, they will spread out their wings and maximize the body surface to the sun to sunbathe. A lot of birds will do this. It looks weird when you first see it, but it's actually a comfort behavior. It wouldn't do to talk about animal behavior without mentioning sex, so if anyone's a little sensitive about sex, I'm just giving you a warning, a couple of sex slides ahead. Animals are highly motivated to engage in sex, not all the time, But when it's time, they're very keen. And I think it's probably safe to say that it's rewarding behavior for them. You may note that this is one cow, a female, mounting another cow, a female, which is to say that sexual behavior is not just about procreation. Mind you, sexual behavior isn't always about sex either. This may be to do with social dominance as well. So there's other, perhaps, social things at play here, so to speak. Speaking of play, play is another wonderful behavior that really is hard to mistake. When we see an animal playing, we pretty much know it based on the behavior of the animal, the way the animal looks and behaves. But nevertheless, play is very adaptive, very important. It's another example of how a behavior that feels good, lo and behold, it's adaptive. There's a reason it feels good. It evolved that way to encourage us to do it. I've actually, this sanctuary I go to, this is not a picture of one of the lambs there, but they recently had 6 lambs. They generally don't breed animals there, but these 3 sheep they rescued they were pregnant, and this particular breed tends to have twins, and all 3 had twins. So they have 6 lambs, and I've been able to watch these lambs go out in the morning after being in their their little enclosure at night, into the field. And within a minute, they start, kicking up and running and chasing each other and jumping on each other's backs and sort of semi-humping each other and all these neat behaviors. It's sort of like they can't resist. They have to do it. They have to run and jump and play. So it's very built into them. And it's very adaptive. It's good for building physical strength and for learning the social behaviors that are going to be important as they grow up. And also avoiding predators, running away, chasing others. These guys don't wrestle so much, but rough and tumble play is very common in rats and monkeys and other animals. It's important to be able to subdue another if you're a predator. It's also important to be able to get away if you're a prey animal. So cats and predators also do a lot of chasing and wrestling. Here's a dog named Ben who I used to watch in a park in England, and his elderly, in her 80s, guardian would bring this filthy tennis ball. I love how he's not looking at the ball. The ball is not going to move itself. She's the one. He's a social animal. He's probably reading the left side of her face. And she throws it, and off he goes. Like an optimistic dog, he's ahead of the ball. And he would have much more energy than she did. She would run out of energy, and he'd still be jumping up at her feet for more. They just love play. I don't know if I can play this. Let's see. No, maybe not. Suffice to say, if it's possible to make it run, fine. If not, it's not a big deal. I can describe it, and it's not a very high-quality video. But in the Netherlands, a few years ago, they published a paper in which they put running wheels out in the wild. I don't want to take credit for this, but when I wrote Pleasurable Kingdom, I included an anecdote in which somebody actually saw a wild rat running in an old discarded running wheel in a barn. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we put running wheels out in the wild instead of traps? And indeed, these guys did it. And this little mouse here is running it's a bit blurry, but this is a wild mouse who's, by their own volition, come into this cage. Not really a cage in the sense that he or she can get out. Maybe had a nibble of food. I think that's food they put out. And then had a little go in the running wheel. And some mice ran for, I think a minute or several minutes, actually. They had mice, they had frogs. They even had a slug who climbed in. And very slow, but it actually did make the wheel rotate. And you can actually watch those videos online. So whether that's joy or play or pleasure in a slug, I'm not going to argue that one way or the other. You can decide for yourself. But anyway, I think it's intriguing that an animal will waste energy on an activity that's clearly not going to be helping them, although they may not know. It's maybe partly curiosity. But many, many animals did that. I want to talk about touch at some length. Yeah, touch is something that's already come up. It's such an important and often overlooked aspect of pleasure in animals' lives. I don't need to convince you that touch is important to you or that it feels good, depending on the context. But generally, touch is pleasurable. And touch is really powerful. It's evolved widely in animal behavior, social behavior. These macaws, long-lived, intelligent birds, they do this allopreening, preening another. Allopreening, we call it allogrooming in mammals. And you can see this threesome. They probably all know each other as individuals. They may have known each other for a decade or more. They may be family members, but certainly by doing this behavior, they're saying, I accept you, I like you, I'm glad you're part of my group. And they also will remember that and maybe do favors to each other in the future. So there's sort of certainly reciprocity involved in this. Many of you probably scratched a cat's chin, and you can just see the pleasure on the cat. And many cats and dogs will nuzzle you for more, a clear indication that they like it. Some animals have the good fortune of having built-in back scratchers. I remember rubbing the back of a sheep on this sanctuary I go to some years ago. My daughter was rubbing another sheep's back, and I stopped to gesture something. I was pointing out something across the hills, and then I felt this scraping on my leg, and the sheep was pawing my leg clearly a request for another back rub. Now that says a lot. It says it's an animal who sees me as another being who has control over himself most of the time and can take action to improve their lot, to improve their welfare. And I've had that happen from other sheep since as well. A study of baboons found that mother baboons who have lost an infant to illness, disease, predation, what have you, shows both physiological and behavioral changes that we show, that women show, mothers show, human mothers, when they lose an infant. I don't need to convince you that it's a grievous, sad loss. How are they feeling about it? Well, they found that glucocorticoid hormones went up significantly for about a month after losing their infant. It's the same pattern we see in humans for about the same time, and then they subside back towards baseline. Behaviorally, we send flowers, we offer condolences, we express our sorrow, we rally around, we spend time with the grieving person, we grieve ourselves. They don't send flowers, as far as I know, but they do change their behavior. They groom more. They spend more time than usual grooming. Grooming, touch, it's a very therapeutic thing for them, apparently. In fact, it's not apparent. You can actually measure hormone levels and find that when they groom, pleasure hormones go up and stress hormones go down. So they seem to be showing the same sort of physiological and behavioral response that we do, which suggests that they have a similar emotional affect in response to that. And by the way, their closest associates in the colony, in the baboon family or colony, also show these changes to a lesser degree, but certainly they're there. In my book, I draw parallels with mammalian behavior and fish behavior because we've really, pardon the pun, missed the boat on fishes. We've really overlooked what they're doing, and there's some great science on fish now, and I'll mention them a couple of times in the remaining 4 hours of my talk. Just making sure some of you are still listening. A study of surgeon fishes, these were taken from the wild in the Great Barrier Reef, striated surgeon fishes. They stressed them by putting them individually in a bucket of water for 30 minutes with just enough water to cover their bodies. I'm not recommending this study, not maybe a very nice thing to do to a wild fish, and sure enough, their stress hormones really went up. You can measure that in the blood. And then what they did was, when they put fishes in individual tanks with a little model of a cleaner fish, these are fishes that actually clean and pluck parasites and off the skin of fishes, including these guys. If the model was stationary, they ignored it. But if it was moving, they swam up next to it, and they got strokes. They were able to move next to it and get caresses on their bodies. Only if it was moving. If it didn't move, they didn't bother with that. And they measured their hormone levels, and the ones who were able to go up to a moving wand or model, their stress went down significantly compared to the ones who were in there with a stationary model. So it's a pretty clear indication that not only do they like the touch, but it's therapeutic for them. I'm happy to say they released all of these fishes back in the wild after the study. That is exceptional. Unfortunately, all studies should be like that if they're doing it at all. And they did that, and they reported that in the journal. Here's a video that clearly indicates that this ringtail lemur likes being stroked on the back, and you'll see how well he or she illustrates that. You can just relate to how this lemur is feeling. I love that YouTube gives you opportunities to see animal behavior in a way that you might not see in other ways. The video continues. There's more examples of that. I will give you the joy of seeing one more, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, you get the idea. In parts of Western India, dogs, feral dogs, have teamed up with langur monkeys. Again, touch is the unifying element here. The monkeys love to groom, and they love to groom the dogs. They probably get little treats, little fleas and ticks, and delicious. It probably just feels fun to groom it, and as this picture kind of shows, the dogs probably really like it too. Are there other benefits? Probably to this mutualistic, mutually respectful relationship. The dog, probably being a predator with big sharp teeth, is a little bit more of a deterrent, perhaps to a neighboring group of langur monkeys, or perhaps other predators, other dogs, or something else. And in turn, the dog gets this spa treatment, this pleasurable parasite removal service. Here's another quite bizarre example, a predator-prey interaction, but there's no predation going on here, where these warthogs will flop down in an invitational gesture. Collaboration, by the way, is the term I was wanting to say. I think it's fair to say these are not just mere mutualisms, they're collaborations. So the warthog flops down and in an area where the warthog knows is banded mongooses, and the banded mongoose family comes up and then swarms over the warthog, removing parasites, bits of salt, what have you. So again, sort of a little nutritional treat, a little fun for a spa treatment for the warthog. And certainly looking at that warthog, I don't think you don't have to go too far with your imagination to realize that he or she is thoroughly enjoying it. Hippos will go into the freshwater springs in Kenya in the morning after foraging on land, open their mouths, splay their toes, spread their legs, and allow full access for fishes of several species who know the schedule. They come swimming over and they pluck away at the teeth to remove plaque, at the bits of vegetation between the toes, and perhaps hippos are a bit ornery. Maybe they had a dispute and there's some wounds they can tend to. So again, everybody seems to be happy. Sometimes the hippos will drift off into a blissful slumber during this time. The fishes do the same thing, as you can guess they do. On reefs, cleaner fishes advertise that they're open for business. Here's a pair of blue-striped cleaner wrasses, the best-known species, working together. And this is scientists call a client fish. There are hundreds of different species of fish that serve as clients. They wait their turn and then swim into this area where these cleaners are doing their business. The cleaners pluck over them, removing parasites and algae, and then the client moves on. It gets a little complex, though. Some cleaners do a better job than others, and client fishes watch for that, and they actually form image scores. That's the scientist's term. They essentially rate over time the quality of the performance of cleaners. So the cleaners are making a living at this. This is how they dine. This is how they get their food. They service hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 clients in one day. So they need to be careful about how well they do it. And perhaps it's Machiavellian, actually, because their favorite thing is the mucus, that slimy lining on the outside of the fish. And if they get a chance, they'll pluck some of that, but only if there's not many clients or no clients around. If other clients are watching, the cleaners do a much better job. That's called an audience effect. And the clients, for their matter, that's why they're watching and forming these image scores and keeping track. They know who's who. So it's really quite a sophisticated social interaction that's ultimately built on the pleasure of touch, but it's a little bit complex. And there's a lot of trust involved, because this pufferfish could easily eat one of these fish when they swim in the mouth, which they will do, and you can watch videos of that. Here's one swimming out of the gills. So there's a lot of trust, and client fishes never eat their cleaners, because you don't eat your business partner. It's not very good for business. And perhaps because of that behavior, some fishes who are long-lived, happy to swim up to trusted divers to be stroked. They're not getting any parasite removal, but it's probably simply because it feels nice, and maybe it's de-stressing as well, like we saw with the surgeon fishes. Sharks are subject to this. Sharks love to be stroked, it appears, and they will go into this hyper-relaxed state, which scientists call it tonic immobility. And these animals are so super relaxed that they will just rest in the lap. And sometimes divers such as Christina Zanato here, who's done a lot of this, she will actually be able to remove hooks from their mouths when they're in this hyper-relaxed state. They're trusting of her, and they know who she is, a theme that we've seen earlier with the cetaceans. What about humor, a sense of humor? Do animals tell jokes? I think they do. Physical jokes, certainly language-trained apes have told jokes and word play. And you can see videos of animals playing, such as a dog and a deer on each side of a fence running back and forth. I love that video on YouTube. I don't have it to show you. But rats, a number of studies have shown that rats love to be tickled, and they laugh when they're tickled. They do ultrasonic chirps, and their brains, the parts of their brains through MRI imaging that are active during the tickling are the same as the parts of our brains when we're laughing or being tickled. And they will run to that hand 4 times as quickly to get a tickle on their belly than if it's just getting a little massage on the neck. Scientists like to measure things, and they make 7 times more ultrasonic chirps. So all indications are that they love it and they're really enjoying it. Here's a lizard who appears to like a belly rub. Not something you'd expect of a lizard, but here you have it. Thanks to YouTube, we can actually see these examples that amateurs can film in their own homes. I'm not advocating having reptiles as pets, but you do see some remarkable behaviors. We may speculate on what this lizard's feeling, but I can't help thinking that it's some kind of positive feeling. What about aesthetic pleasure? I went to the art gallery yesterday and enjoyed looking at some of the fine Belgian art. Do peahens enjoy beholding peacocks? I mean, this stuff didn't evolve for humans. We appreciate it. It's very nice. But the fact that it's so showy and spectacular suggests that there's some kind of positive response to that. Certainly females are assessing and also forming image scores of their potential mates. But I think it compels more than just that interpretation. Fishes also do some pretty spectacular artistry of their own. A little pufferfish, only 4 inches long, found off the southern coast of Japan, spent 2 days making this 6-foot-wide mandala-like structure, and it's to attract a mate and to nest in. There's the fish, of course. There's the male working hard. And it was a mystery at first, and then they set up cameras and saw these fishes come in. And I want to point out it's pure coincidence that this looks so much like a vegan cheesecake that I made for a staff party. Nothing to do with attracting mates. You won't find love in the index of biology textbooks, but we should expect love, feelings like love, to evolve in animals who work together to raise their young, animals who will in turn inherit the genes for loving behavior. So certainly emotions are just as subject to an evolution as are physical traits. We see kissing in birds. These are rainbow lorikeets. They mate for life. You would expect emotional attachment in a species like that. And there's no reason why these connections cannot cross species barriers, as we saw with touch earlier. And just to finish up on pleasure before I sum it up with my few minutes remaining, a couple of minutes, we often overlook the power of freedom. I think we think about freedom as a value when we take animals captive, and maybe that's the way they see it. Maybe they don't think about their freedom. But freedom is, I think, an intrinsic joy, the ability to decide what we do, the autonomy to do what we want to do when we want to do it. And we should not ignore that as a powerful force of good in animals' lives, because it's such a tragedy when we take it away. So just to sum up then, I've spent most of my time giving you examples of pleasure, but I do want to finish up with just the significance of pleasure to our evolving relationship to animals. I hope that you've gleaned from what I've said that there's so much interdependence that's grounded in pleasure, that pleasure plays an important role in how animals not necessarily depend on each other always, but benefit from each other, mutual benefits, which is a form of interdependence, if you like. So if you can feel pleasure, the philosophy term would be that you have intrinsic value. Your life has value beyond any value that it may have to someone else. So the dairy farmer who keeps cows to make milk, which usually means taking the baby away from the mother, that's an example where the cow has utilitarian value to the farmer. But intrinsic value is the value the cow has to herself, where she loves her calf, she enjoys eating in the pasture, enjoys going where she wants to go. You may have seen videos, again, on YouTube of cows being let out of their winter barn the first time in the spring, and they're kicking their legs. They look like lambs in the field, running around joyously. It's just really great to watch. So intrinsic value, quality of life. If you can enjoy something, if you can feel pleasure, then life has some quality to it, a worthiness. It's worth living. It's a life worth living. It also follows, I think, that if you can enjoy life, death is bad. Death is a cost. Death is harmful. This is not a complex concept. We understand it so well in our own society. Why is murder such a horrible crime? I think it's not because you've denied the victim of future pains and suffering. Yes, pain and suffering is part of life, but the crux of it is that you've taken away that individual's opportunity to continue living. And why is that valuable? Because life is worth living because it has joys and pleasures and good things in it. I think that's the crux of it. In even a hypothetical death that was painless, the victim didn't have any relatives, no one to grieve their loss, we would still say that was a crime that the perpetrator committed by taking that life. And I think the reason for that is because the life is still worth living in that circumstance. And so animals have these same basic interests that we do. They want to minimize pain, they want to maximize pleasure, and they want to avoid death. And they show that through their behavior, that they have all those three priorities in their hearts. And humans are very fickle things. We categorize animals. We're very good at categorizing and classifying and putting them in different groups. And by doing that, we treat them very differently depending on who they are and where we are. As it was sort of mentioned last night, this animal is revered as a beloved companion animal in some parts of the world, and in other parts it's dinner. And in this animal, dinner in many parts of the world, and revered as a sacred creature in other parts. And I show this picture in particular because they look very similar, and that's the point. I think in all the important ways, their capacity to think and feel, to enjoy, to fear things, to have those emotions and feelings, they are essentially equals. And I would say they are essentially equal to us. They deserve more moral respect than we have been giving them, because they can enjoy their lives. And just one last thought is, I love the concept of karma. I'm sure Mathieu Ricard does too, because I think it's a Buddhist concept. I don't know if he's Buddhist, but anyway. Karma, what goes around comes around. What's good for one is ultimately good for the other. If we, and as we, to put it optimistically, as we move towards a more respectful relationship to other animals, it's obviously good for them. It's obviously beneficial for the animals, but it's equally beneficial to us. Surely our lives are elevated when we elevate theirs. Thank you very much.